Hello everyone and welcome to the Fundamentals of Sound Design. So this is vital knowledge that you are going to need to produce your audio soundscape assignment. So again, that assignment is a 3-minute audio soundscape and we want it to be narrative. So we're going to learn some of the terms that are associated with sound and some of the theory behind sound, and then we're going to learn some practical things as well that are going to help you create that audio soundscape. Okay, I had kind of a lot of fun here looking at different dictionary definitions of sound. So the Cambridge Dictionary is very simple, something that can be heard. Merriam-Webster, a little bit more scientific, the sensation perceived by the sense of hearing. The Oxford Dictionary, more complex yet, vibrations that travel through the air or another medium and can be heard when they reach a person or an animal's ear. And finally, my favorite definition from the Collins English Dictionary, a sound is something that you hear and sound is energy that travels in waves through air, water, or other substances and can be heard. So the important things to consider here are sound is something that you hear, very obvious, but sound is energy, sound is vibration, or you could also say sound occurs in waves. Okay, one other thing I want you to consider before we dive into the more scientific stuff is qualities of sound. So when you create your narrative soundscape, you will be creating sound that has a certain quality and perhaps sound that is in a certain genre. So for example, this audio soundscape is a narrative piece. So you're going to be telling a story through sound. And what type of quality of sound do you want? I'm not just referring to the quality of the recording. I'm referring to what quality you want the sound to have. For example, are you hoping for an atmospheric, full-bodied sound of a landscape at night, very quiet, low dialogue? Or are we looking for something shocking, loud, high frequency? Are we looking for something that changes from that quiet soundscape to something that's very dramatic over time? So I want you to think too about what quality of sound you wish to create. All right, so my neighbor's dog, just a minute ago before I closed all the windows to record this, was barking like crazy. And when my neighbor's dog barks, he emits vibrations from his throat that enter my ear and can be represented as waves. So here is a representative of an analog sound wave, and this wave has certain qualities, amplitude and frequency. And we're going to talk about those first. So my neighbor's dog is actually a very big dog and he produces a very low woof. So his sound wave would not look like this. This would be more like a chihuahua. So as you can see, this sound wave is occurring frequently. So it has high frequency, which means it is high pitched, and it is high amplitude. In other words, the curve is more dramatic and bigger. So that means it's louder. So this would be the barking of a loud chihuahua, as opposed to if my curve was a little bit more low and occurred less frequently, that would be equivalent to my neighbor's dog barking every so often in a low pitch. All right, let's dive into that. Okay, so qualities of a sound wave. One of those would be hertz. And this is one of the more common measures, and it's the measure of frequency. So we know everything has a frequency. For example, the Earth spins around its axis once every 24 hours. So the Earth's frequency of spinning is once every 24 hours. But hertz is a measure of frequency specific to sound, and it's 1 cycle per second. Everything we hear has a certain frequency. For example, my Chihuahua versus my neighbor's big dog, which I think is a pit bull. So the pit bull barks woof, 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 low frequency sound, whereas the Chihuahua barks woof, 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 high frequency sound. Okay, so people with normal hearing can typically hear from about 50 hertz on the low end to 20,000 hertz on the high end. So, and as we age, we actually lose the ability to hear certain sounds, mostly on the high frequency end. And here are just a couple other terms for you: kilohertz and megahertz and gigahertz, thousands of hertz, millions of hertz, gigabytes of hertz, billions of hertz. Okay, so 1 cycle per second, so frequency equals pitch. Okay, that's one of the attributes of hertz. So if we have a low hertz sound, like a 50 hertz sound, a low rumbling sound, like the rumble of thunder in the distance, and a 20 kilohertz sound, or 20,000 hertz, would be very high frequency, or very high, like a chirping bird, a child screaming, a cymbal clashing. That would be a high frequency sound. So most speech, when I'm talking to you here right now, it's about a few hundred hertz to about 8 kilohertz. So I can talk to you very, very quietly and low, or I can talk to you very high and very fast, right? But you can, as you age, as I said, we lose the ability to hear certain frequencies of sound, and that's usually on the high end because our ear does not regenerate over time. Now, I noticed this in my late 40s when I stopped being able to hear my child screaming on the playground. So it will happen to you, just wait. Okay, so remember, hertz equals pitch. So a high frequency sound is going to have a high amplitude, or more frequent wave. So you might think this might be bark, 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 and it might be, but what we're going to perceive is the higher the frequency, the higher the pitch, whereas lower frequency sounds are going to have a lower pitch. So that's just a visual representation of pitch in sound. Okay, so I mentioned the word amplitude, and the amplitude is the size of the vibration, and this determines loudness. So the higher the curve, the louder the sound. The more frequent the curve, the higher the pitch. Let me say that again. The higher the curve, the louder the sound. The more frequent the curve, the higher the pitch. So this would be a loud, high-pitched sound, right? Because it's occurring frequently and the curve is high amplitude. Okay, another measurement of sound that we want to think about is decibels. So decibels are, in essence, they're how loud something is, but we can more accurately think about them as a measure of intensity. And they're discussed as a relative measurement, although you can in software increase the decibel level of a sound or decrease it. Sound is actually perceived subjectively. Age of the listener, frequency of the sound make a difference in how that sound is perceived by the human ear. So there's the cliche of we have older people with the TV on really loud, right? And I'm starting to be a part of that group, so I guess I won't take that analogy any further. But we want to think about what can we hear, what's the lowest range of human hearing, about 10 decibels. Whereas we can also have sounds that are painful to the human ear, and I'm sure you've experienced that. So 130 decibels would be, for example, if you've ever been to a concert where there was feedback, for example, that was painful to your ear. So decibels, measure of loudness. So let's put it all together here. Okay, so a higher pitched sound will have a more amplitude in the curve. A lower pitched sound will have lower, shallower curves. A louder sound, is going to have a higher curve, literally higher, whereas a quieter sound will have a lower curve. So here again we have, if we put those together, a higher pitched sound occurs more frequently, and the higher the curve, the louder it is, and vice versa. Okay, so I'm going to put that to the test right now in Audition. So I'm going to speak low, I'm going to speak low and slow, I'm going to speak fast, I'm going to speak high and fast. Okay, so I'm going to go over to Audition here, and I have a multi-track session open at the moment, which I'm going to save. And so I'm going to create a new audio file. I'm going to call this one Voice Test. And we'll go over the kilohertz channels and bit depth in a minute. All right, so I'm going to hit the record button, and let's watch the sound wave. I am speaking low and slow. I am speaking low and loud. I am speaking very fast, very, very fast, very, very fast. I am speaking very high and very fast, very, very, very high and very, very fast. Okay, now that was kind of funny, but you can see the curve here. So if I'm speaking low, here I'm speaking low and slow, and I have lower frequency to the curve, and I also have lower amplitude. Now when I started to speak more loudly, I am speaking low and loud. I have high frequency. I have high amplitude to my curve here. Right here, I overdid it a bit right there. But when I start to speak high, you can really tell the difference in the amplitude and frequency of the curve. I am speaking very fast, very, very fast, very, very fast. Okay? And now I'm going to speak high and fast, and you're going to see that both the amplitude and the frequency are much higher. I am speaking very high and very fast, very, very high and very, very fast. See? Okay, so that's our visual example. Now I'm going to flip back to PowerPoint here. Hope you got a kick out of that. Okay, here's what my screenshot looks like. I actually did it a bit more dramatically for our example. Okay, so when I created a new audio file in Audition, I have to choose a sample rate in hertz. Okay, so I just told you that hertz was a measure of frequency. So the more frequently something is sampled when we're digitizing sound, the higher the accuracy. Now this also increases the file size and the processing time needed to work on that file. So I'm going to make it very simple for you. We're always going to sample at 44.1 kilohertz or 44,100 hertz. The reason is, A, that's the sampling rate for CDs. So gives us a 20 kilohertz maximum frequency, which is the highest frequency that generally humans can hear. So that's just the logical choice. Okay, so we have hertz as a measure of frequency, and we also use it as a measure of sampling rate. All right, here's an easy choice for you. I would like you to record in stereo. So we have mono, 1 channel, or stereo, 2 channels. We're not going to get into 5 to 1 surround sound in this class. We're just going to record in stereo, unless there's a compelling reason to record in mono, which in our case, there's really not. Okay, and finally, we're going to choose bit depth. And you may remember bit depth from when we talked about Photoshop, and we said the bit depth refers to the bits of color information available per pixel. Well, it's very similar in audio. Bit depth refers to the number of bits of data that you have to capture audio. So for example, the standard used to be 16-bit audio, so 65,536 possible levels. And our standard is now 24-bit audio. So remember, in 24-bit color, we have 16.7 million colors. In 16-bit audio, we have 16.7 numbers, 16.7 million bits of data available for one slice of audio in one single moment in time. Okay, so it works the same way. Now you'll notice that we have a 32-bit option in both Audition and Audacity. So that's actually temporary. It gives you a little bit more room on the high end and a little bit more room on the low end to process your data. But actually, your sounds will eventually be rendered in 24-bit. It just gives the software a little bit more room to work with. So float is just a temporary fix. Okay, in digital imaging, number of bits available per pixel multiplied by however many pixels that we have going gives us the size of the image in megabytes. And when we digitize sound, we use the same principle. So let's say we're digitizing sound in 24-bit, but we are also adding the value of time. So as in digital imaging, we're looking at the value of size. In audio, we're looking at the value of time. So the sample rate is the number of times your audio is measured or sampled per second. And as I said, CDs, 44.1 kilohertz. So you can think about that as 44,100 slices of data every second. Okay, so, and this brings us to another term, which we don't really need to worry about too much except in terms of file size. So bit rate is how much data per second is required to transmit or play the file, and that has an effect on how big your file becomes. All right, now these are both measured in hertz, so it gets a little bit confusing. So remember, your sample rate is the number of samples taken per second. The higher that is, the higher quality sound you will be recording, and the larger the sound it will be on disk. And audio frequency is also measured in hertz, and it relates to the pitch of the sound. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. The lower the frequency, the lower the pitch. Both of those are measured in hertz, so that's important. Okay, so here's just a visual on what type of file size that you could imaginably get from sampling one sound. So as you can see, these can go up pretty quickly. So I would recommend when you work with audio that you have some sort of, whether it's a personal hard drive or a jump drive that has several gigs of data available, you're going to want something that's able to handle big files, because while you're in the processing phase, before we mix down to an MP3, take a look at this. We're sampling at 24 kilohertz. This is our sample rate, 96,000. And so a one minute in stereo would give us 33 megabytes or 99 megabytes on disk. So if we record, 20 or 30 sounds, this is going to add up rather quickly. And now when we mix this down to an MP3 format, we are going to get a much smaller file. I do want you to remember to save all of your original files though, so you're going to need plenty of disk space for this assignment. Okay, so we talked about a waveform, and we looked at waveforms in the beginning. Now, one thing that we are also working with is this is a digital waveform. So this is capturing this is a graph that captures the digitized sound. So it is not the same as an audio waveform that we would get on, for example, old analog equipment. This one has been digitized. It has been converted into bits and bytes and kilobytes of data, and megabytes of data, actually. So when we look at this, we're seeing a digital version. Now, what does this remind you of? I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the histogram in digital imagery. Remember, the histogram is a measure of the values in the image. So it would go from black to white, and it would show us where all of our data was hitting. So all of our visual data, for example, might be at the high end, meaning that we have a lighter image, and our data at the low end would be a darker color. Okay, so think about that. So right now I have a low amplitude, low frequency sound, and guess what? It's at the low end of our hearing range, and it is a low, not very loud sound. And to make the analogy even better, here we have high amplitude, high frequency sound data, which is high pitched and fast. So we can think about that as equivalent to a lighter color. That helps me. I hope it helps you. Okay, so here's the question of the day. Should we always record at a high bit depth and a sample rate? Well, guess what? Eventually you're going to run into limitations. So people who are in audio are just like people who are in video and photography. We're all obsessed with our equipment. So I want you to just stick to 24-bit or 32-bit floating and 44 kilohertz. You're going to have excellent quality. And if you go higher, it doesn't mean it's going to sound better. You won't even notice the difference. In fact, well, you might notice the difference, but your audience may not notice the difference. There are a lot of other things that make for a good audio recording, and they are all common sense. So the first time I made a movie, guess what I forgot to do? I forgot to turn off the refrigerator, and we were recording that scene in the kitchen. So I had 2 actors on set, and I'm recording them, and to my utter shock, once I got back into the studio and put on some headphones, I have this low noise. Zzz. And I'm thinking, what the heck is that? And creating a quiet environment when you record will compensate for poor equipment in any number of situations. Common sense will do more for you than all the equipment in the world. So when you record, do yourself a favor, close the windows, turn off the refrigerator, record in a quiet place, and that will give you a much better recording without worrying about bit depth, kilohertz, sampling frequency, and all that other stuff. Common sense will give you better audio every time. Okay, and let's talk about recording technology. Now, we don't have access to microphones in this class, but I will tell you that I have taken films to festivals where I've recorded the dialogue in a bathroom with my iPhone. And I've also tried to incorporate sounds that I recorded in a noisy environment. Why I did this, I don't know, but I recorded it with a shotgun mic, which is supposed to capture just the dialogue and none of the background noise. Not so fast. I still had noise that I had to deal with, reduce and compress. So use common sense when you're recording your sounds. Go into a quiet place with no windows and you will get better audio quality no matter what you're recording with. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to be doing is layering audio. And I'm going to show you a quick example of that in Audition. And I'm going to use some sounds that I got off a website. That website is called freesound.org. Okay, we'll talk about audio file formats in a minute. Okay, so I am going to go to Audition and I'm going to create a new multi-track session. And I'm going to call this one Test 2 since I've already done Test 1. I'm going to tell it where to save it. And notice I'm using my 44K sample rate. By the way, 48K is used for DVDs, but I'm not going to get any advantage if I go all the way up. Just stick with 44K, make me happy. And I have the choice here of recording in 24-bit, 16-bit, or 32 float. And I am going to use 32 float. That will give me 24-bit audio. And of course, I'm going to record in stereo. So I'm going to click OK. And now I'm getting all of these tracks. Now I'm using Audition. Audacity will look somewhat different. So I'm going to start here with a quiet sound, and I'm going to hit the space bar. So that's the sound of a motorcycle. Okay, notice that sound. So we have low frequency sound, and it is recorded at a low volume, and it is a low sound. Here comes the motorcycle. Higher frequency, higher pitch. Even higher frequency. And then it roars off at very high frequency and high pitch. Now, I actually don't want to start with that sound. I'm going to get rid of it for now. I am going to start with, let's see. Let's start with an ambience track. So this is some birds chirping in the night with a thunderstorm. Low frequency, low amplitude. Check that out. Now, about the time the thunder hits, I'm going to go with a high frequency, high amplitude sound, a thunderclap. So we're going to go from soft to crazy in a hurry here. Now, I'm not transitioning these sounds at all. This is just a very quick demo. Okay, so we have a storm's coming. All right, now as the storm comes, we're going to have a dog start to bark. So the dog is going to bark immediately before our big thunderclap occurs. Okay, so you can see that I'm starting to create some atmosphere with this sound. And notice that my sound, just like in Photoshop, when we had images occurring in layers, I noticed that my sound occurs in layers. Okay, so I have a lot of other crazy stuff that I could put in here, but we're going to go over that in a later lecture. So I'm actually going to close it out for now by saying that I want you to keep the uncompressed versions of your sounds, and most of the time you're going to be working with and recording in the WAV format, which is uncompressed, and you're going to be mixing down to an MP3 format, which is compressed. So we will cover that on Thursday. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this.